Welcome to Private Banking Strategies Podcast with Vance, Lowe, and Seth Hicks, your secret weapon to protect your assets and never have to start over financially again. Vance and Seth help high net worth individuals, families, business owners, and investors structure an asset-protected, tax-free fortress for their families. Learn how to keep what you earn and use the velocity of money to create your own private banking system. Join us on this journey as we explore the secret strategies of the rich and political elite and help you take total control of your financial security. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Private Banking Strategies with Vance, Lowe, and Seth Hicks. Gentlemen, it's so good to be back with you. How are you?
Doing absolutely wonderful. Yeah, it's just great to be back. Sometimes I miss our conversations, and I'm sure happy that we can have an opportunity to share a few thoughts and ideas with our listeners.
Yeah, and Vance, I know that you have been on vacation, right? Did you go someplace?
Yeah, we did a 70th birthday annual reunion with my family.
Oh, nice.
So everybody was disappointed when I told them I stopped counting birthdays after 48.
48's the number. Got it. Well, funny you should say that. I turn 48 next month. So now I know. That's it.
Okay.
I'm done.
Well, pretty soon you'll be as old as me.
That's right. Yeah, about a month. Yeah. Oh, that's fun. All right. So, gentlemen, what are we talking about today?
Well, Eric, we're going to lay some foundation for asset protection, which is the first pillar of private banking strategies. Mm-hmm. We're getting this question quite a bit from listeners and also from clients who want to implement the asset protection for their cash and for their real property and business assets. But first, let's start with the cash aspect. And we're going to ask ourselves the question of how you protect your cash and how do you keep that in a place which is totally liquid, but yet safe from confiscation or excessive taxation. Mm-hmm. Because the problem that we're facing, I think, in our current culture is that we have an 800-pound gorilla running loose with two massive arms reaching for assets. And one arm is taxation and the other arm is confiscation. And the 800-pound gorilla is called government. Mm-hmm. So, and we've talked about this in prior episodes, but the model of Keynesian economics, which is a printing of money without any tie to value. We're not on the gold standard and the silver standard tied to our money, as we've discussed previously, and we've got this monopoly printing of money that's now over $30 trillion of U.S. national debt that's growing by the second. Yeah. So where do we solve that problem? How do we satisfy that gorilla? That's one of the questions we're going to be asking.
I'd like to avoid the gorilla. I don't know if I want to satisfy that gorilla, but I know that avoidance is kind of illegal when we're talking like tax and things like that, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And we're not talking about illegal tax strategies. We're talking about things that are completely legal and completely actually codified by the Internal Revenue Code in Section 7702, which we'll get into a little bit further as we drill down. And I agree with you. We're not looking to satisfy this gorilla. We're looking to stay completely out of its path. And there will be folks who are unprepared and unaware and think that some of the ideas we're discussing are fantastic and that they don't really need to protect their cash. And I feel sorry for those people, but it's actually quite easy to take steps to protect yourself.
Let me just jump in here for a second. And one of the best ways to avoid taxes is not have taxable events. Mm-hmm. And inside the strategy, which we talk about and help set up for clients, once principal is earned from outside sources and the taxes are paid inside your own economic unit, money can move and be put to work and not cause taxable events. So that's one form of asset protection, is helping to not pile up a boatload of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just thought I'd mention it.
That's not tax avoidance. That's just playing within the rules and the benefits that the ultra wealthy and folks like John F. Kennedy and Ray Kroc and Walt Disney and numerous other wildly successful entrepreneurs and high net worth individuals have used. They've created this carve out, and you're smart to take advantage of it. So that's all we're doing, Eric. We're not talking about breaking any law.
Yeah, well, this is the conversation that I've had with my kids, right? Both of my kids are adults now. I call them kids still, but they're adults, and they've both, on separate occasions, as we've been talking, they see the news. It sensationalizes all sorts of things. But man, the rich don't pay their fair share. The rich don't, they don't pay the same kind of taxes we do. They have all these loopholes just for them, and I have to remind them that, number one, any loophole that they're using is placed there by the IRS, basically, right? It's not that they're breaking the law, and it may seem, quote unquote, unfair that they're not paying their, again, quote unquote, fair share. But bottom line is that they know the strategies to use to pay as little tax as possible. And a lot of them have to do with their business and so on and so forth. So it's not like they're breaking the rules or playing by the rules. It's just rules that most people don't have access to.
Precisely.
Eric, one of the things we also have to understand, in actuality, most of that, I think, is propaganda, by our government and whatever. But the high-end earner does pay the lion's share of the taxes in the United States. They pay more in taxes than the blue-collar or middle class do. Yep. As a total, not as a percentage. As a percentage, they're a little bit smarter, and they do take advantage of everything they possibly can, or government will take everything they've got.
Yeah,
and here's an interesting fact that I'll highlight. In the 2016 presidential election, there were debates between Trump and Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton was sounding a trumpet that says he doesn't pay his taxes. Trump doesn't pay any taxes, and Trump simply says, I don't pay any taxes because I'm smart and it's completely legal. So we're talking about using the laws that have been established for our betterment and for our benefit. And there's no reason to not take advantage of those laws. And it's like Vance says, you don't incur a taxable event when you set up the strategies that we're going to be discussing. So let's talk about something that one of the arms of the 800-pound gorilla called confiscation, and something that has been in the last decade, something that I think most people thought would never have come into their backyard. Bail-ins. What is a bail-in and what is a bail-out, and what how did they come about? Well, you may remember in the 2008 financial crisis, where there was toxic mortgage debt, that there were some large financial institutions which were effectively insolvent, and the government declared them too big to fail, and so they used U.S. taxpayer dollars to effectively rescue those companies, and it outraged taxpayers. And they started banging their war drums and saying you shouldn't be using taxpayer dollars to bail out private financial institutions, no matter how big they are. And so Congress said, wonderful, let's change the legislation. And they called it the Dodd-Frank Act, which also has the Consumer Protection Act in its name, which is funny because it does nothing to protect consumers. And that Dodd-Frank Act actually legalized what's known as a bail-in. Yeah, with a bail-in it's where the money that's deposited into a banking institution is actually able to be seized by the bank if the bank determines that it's insolvent and needs to capture those deposits to balance its books so that it can stay solvent. And people think that's not right. That's absolutely thievery, and that's exactly what it is. But that's what the Dodd-Frank Act allows. It allows these banks to create banking contracts with you, which you sign. You roll through 50 pages of paper when you open a bank account. Initial here, sign here. I don't know anybody who reads that. Do you read that, Eric?
No, just like the Apple update. It's 152 pages. Sure, I accept it.
Right.
Who does?
What else are you going to do? Hire a lawyer to negotiate it? And you don't have an option. If you want to open that bank account, you check yes, accept, and sign here. And when you do that, you're effectively taking your deposits that you deposit in that bank, and you're agreeing that they're actually the bank's money now, and they have an IOU, which they owe you. And if everything works out well, and then you're able to pull cash out, you're able to write checks on that, and everything goes on just like it has for decades. But if that bank becomes insolvent and they've got to take depositors' cash, you're going to get an IOU from that bank, and you're either going to get stock or other effectively pennies on the dollar value for what your deposits were. And that's what a bail-in is. And the next question that people say is, I've got insurance through the FDIC, right? Have you heard that, Vance?
Oh, time and time again. We're brainwashed into it.
And tell folks what the FDIC is and what it does for you and doesn't do for you.
It's a government insurance program that protects every single account. I think it's up to $200,000 per account. That if the bank becomes insolvent, there is insurance to fund back that money into your account. That's what and why we all deposit monies in the bank, because it's safe.
Or so you think.
So is it the full 250,000, or is that
per account?
Yeah, they're supposedly insuring $250,000 per account at a banking institution, but here's where you really need to pay attention, because that's an illusion for the unsuspecting. There's about $17.4 trillion in cash deposits in U.S. centralized banks, according to CNBC. Now, when you look at the FDIC's own published accounting that they show you what they have in reserves, it's a pittance compared to 17.4 trillion. I think it was 100 billion or less recently when the Harvard economics professor did a study that I was investigating. You got about 1.3 cents on every dollar actually in reserves. So you've got this promise of, we'll insure $250,000 per account in each of these banks, but in reality, they don't have the money to back that up. And if the government were going to try to bail out the FDIC, that would be happening in an absolutely catastrophic type of situation, catastrophic atmosphere, and it won't pencil, it won't work. So your deposits in there, it's an illusion to think that they're safe with FDIC insurance. They're simply not.
Yeah, it's a complete and total fallacy that your assets in bank accounts now have actual insurance to back it up. Those funds and those assets are going to be lost. Another note I'd just like to mention out, and the only reason I'm going to mention it right now is we've had an uptick in people reporting that my bank will only let me pull out a maximum amount of $500 in cash at one time now. That is definitely a signal of tightening, of not having those cash reserves, because when you print money, those dollar bills are not being printed. And they do not have anywhere near the assets to pay all the depositors back. And if there's a run they've already made limits that we don't have to give you this. We really don't have to give you any of your assets in cash or honor accounts up to 6 months. Well, they can take as long as 6 months. But what we're hearing today, and I heard this over the last month at least 4 times, and I documented it, of people telling me, Vance, did you know I went in to get a little bit of cash, and I wanted $1,000 of cash, and they're only giving me $500.
Do you see yourself in that story? Do you feel like you are generating a lot of revenue but are not moving forward as fast as you would like? Are you ready for help? Please call Private Banking Strategies at 817-200-4777 or visit us at www.privatebankingstrategies.com.
So let me ask you about the bail-ins, right? I mean, that's kind of the first time I've heard of that, Seth. Is that just in the U.S. or is that a global thing?
It's actually a worldwide policy that we've seen being implemented over the past decade or more. Now, for folks, they may or may not be aware that it's actually already occurred in other countries. Like in Cyprus, there was the Cyprus bail-in in 2013, where depositors woke up on a Saturday and their bank accounts had been frozen, and anything over $100,000 in these accounts was seized at 50%. So if you had $1 million bucks in the bank account, first 100,000 was yours, and then the other 900 was 50% was taken, and you actually got the other 50%. And there's still litigation going on to try to recover cash assets. Ireland, their former finance minister, Michael Noonan, said bail-ins are now the rule. And in fact, all 28 European Union countries have codified bail-in rules and bail-in laws. So it's actually a worldwide policy, and it begs some really interesting questions that I'm going to pose to you. I'm not going to answer them all, but we're going to pose to you and the listeners so that they can go do some research and lay some dots out and see if the light bulbs come on. But I mean, Eric, we talked about this a little bit on the last show. You brought up the fact that Canadian citizens who had supported the trucker movement, even to the tune of a $10 donation, they had bank accounts frozen. And I don't know if you followed any more of that news thread, but it's effectively taking without any due process, a taking without any type of breaking of a law. It's simply that you disagree with a minority dictator in place. And that's what we're seeing. So to answer your question, it's a worldwide policy. It's a global confiscation, or a teeing up for global confiscation. I think the Cyprus was a test run to see if they could get away with it, what people would do. And I think as fiat currency continues to inflate and have less and less value, you're going to see this occur more and more. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, when you say that, I actually think we have some current things happening. I mean, that are even more current. I mean, the Canadian thing wasn't that long ago, but I know that I've seen a lot of reports of very wealthy Russian oligarchs. Their yachts are being, seized and held in different countries.
We were talking about this before we started recording, Vance and I, and wherever in time have you seen, without any type of formal charging or any type of due process where there's actually a fair and just hearing, that assets are just taken? So you have billion-dollar yacht sitting in a foreign sovereign country's port, and they just seize it and take it because you're a Russian citizen and affiliated supposedly with Putin. It's more of just a accusatory confiscation, and I don't think we've seen that in our lifetimes ever before.
Yeah, how do you verify, right? How do you verify that that's somebody that is close ties to Putin and supports him and has whatever? I think it's more of just a label, right? Oh, you're rich and you're Russian. okay, well then I'm going to take this and we're going to seize your property. We're going to seize your house. I know that there was, I saw a large house that was seized and other people were put in it because I think Ukrainians. And again, I have no problem with that if these people are supporting the war on the Ukrainians. But like you said, there was no due process. There was just an assumption. And if you're rich and you're Russian, and yeah, I'm going to take your stuff because that's the quote unquote fair thing, which I don't know.
You wouldn't think that in America that those type of occurrences would happen, or that America would be complicit in things such as the Dodd-Frank Act, where the deposits of citizens are actually the bank deposits, but they kind of hide that. And that's what's really shocking, is that there's this what's easily rat-holed as, conspiracy theory, fringe, fantastic, sensationalized news, or it's easy to pigeonhole those that don't believe you as crazy or fantastic. And if you can convince other people that they're crazy or fantastic, no one pays attention. And I remember when I have a friend who told me, this has been over a decade ago, and we're both into precious metals. And he was telling me the only thing with precious metals is that the government could pass a law and effectively confiscate metals. And I said, yeah, not in a free America, never going to happen. And he laughed and he said, are you kidding? It's already happened. FDR passed a law that required private citizens to turn in their gold at $20 an ounce, and then they magically made them $35 an ounce overnight. And if you didn't, it was punishable with jail time. And there are people who went to jail. And I said, that didn't happen. And so I looked it up and started researching it. And sure enough, it was shocking to me that in a free America, the government passed a law, the president had an executive order that confiscated gold. Did you know that, Eric?
I have never heard that before. No.
Vance, did you know that?
Oh yeah, I knew that had happened. Also, we have history of putting a group of people in concentration camps in World War II.
Yep.
Almost all Japanese citizens in the United States were rounded up and taken to concentration camps.
Yep.
So our government does have some radical things. They do push them. We are being tested in every way, and it's time that we either start our own economic situation or we do something to let government know in mass quantities that what you're doing is going to cease, or you're not going to be there.
So what we're trying to do here for our audience is pop the bubble, the illusion bubble that you're completely safe in centralized banks with your cash, and that the government is always acting in your best interest. It's simply not the case. And I said when we started out, I was going to ask a few questions that I wasn't going to answer, but for those who want to go look for the answers, I invite that drill down. And so we talked a little bit on our last podcast about the Federal Reserve, Eric, and we talked about the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, and also the IRS implementing income tax in 1913. And that was no mistake that it happened in the same year. I'd ask the audience to think about and ask themselves, what is the Federal Reserve? Is it, as the name suggests, a part of our government, or is it a private entity? And who owns the Federal Reserve if it's not a government entity? Why does it exist? And likewise, who owns the centralized banks where we deposit our money? There's also an International Monetary Fund, which is an organization called the IMF, the acronym for International Monetary Fund, and it controls monetary policy throughout the globe. It was co-founded by John Maynard Keynes, who I learned in my current research, to my surprise, was one of the co-founders. It's also he is also responsible for Keynesian economics, which is the printing of money effectively, which we're experiencing now. So when people begin to answer those questions about the Federal Reserve and centralized banks and the IMF, you're going to see a connection of dots that creates a more nefarious plan of control than most people have really ever considered or thought imaginable. The centralized banks, they're effectively cracking down on cash transactions, as Vance had mentioned, and your bank effectively reports what they consider a suspicious deposit or a suspicious withdrawal. Why do you need $5,000 in cash? What's your business? And those type of questions, if you've never been asked those, try to go withdraw $15,000 in cash from your bank account, or open up a business account. And it's this KYC protocol that's been implemented, and the bank is effectively an agent of the government. And I don't know if you've ever had that occurrence, but for example, in real estate development, if you're paying some contractors by sub and you need cash to pay them, and you're pulling cash out of your bank account, you'll have a teller ask you questions. The manager will come over and ask you questions, or if you make a deposit in cash, the same protocol. You've got to ask yourself why. I mean, is that not strange? Have you ever experienced that, Eric?
I have not, and that's it's a little bit bothersome. Not that I haven't done it, but it's bothersome that if they're asking you, well, what's your business? I'm going to ask, well, why is it your business? It should be none of their business. This is the money that I have in my account. I'm not asking to take out extra. If I have 15 in there, I'm not saying, hey, give me 20. Then they can ask me questions. But yeah, no, I'm not too keen on that.
Yeah, that would be called a loan, right? And that's where it comes back to this is my money, or so we think it's our money. But in effect, they want to control your cash transactions, and they want to control you.
Guys, this is all part of what sometimes I term as the ostrich syndrome. We bury our heads in the sand. We think. And no matter how much we have talked about the Dodd-Frank Act ever since it was passed, people still believe the money in their bank accounts are owned by them. And that is not the case. The banks own that money, and they feel they have the right to ask the questions when you pull money out. Hey, why are you taking our money back out? So, Eric, that if you look at it that way, we can all see, I guess, if they really think it's their money and not our money, they may be entitled to ask those questions. But this is all coming from higher up. They don't know why, in many cases, why they have to ask these questions. They just know they have to ask them. And if they get a belligerent answer, or if they get a suspicious answer, they have to document it and report it. They actually have to do a report on $5,000 and above now that you pull. And if they're not allowing that, I think just recently I had read where anything that's suspicious can have a report written up on it coming out of your account.
Well, and here's the thing is I think that they have tried to normalize this by saying, these are safety procedures. We want to make sure somebody's not getting scammed. And as much as I appreciate stopping a 85-year-old woman who maybe has shown some signs of dementia from pulling out $50,000 in cash to give to the pool boy, I don't think it's their responsibility to check every possible transaction. It just doesn't make much sense.
Precisely. And it's always in the name of, well, we're doing it for your good, right? It's for your benefit. We've never lived in a society since the inception of our country that adhere to that. We take responsibility for our own actions, and family helps family. And so it's a great cover, but in reality, it's about control. And here's an interesting fact as well. Since the coronavirus pandemic has been in the past couple of years. There's been almost $4 trillion deposited in centralized banks. That's a massive increase in cash influx into normal bank account deposits, and part of it is directly tied to the printing of money. Since we've started tracking this in the past year and a half, the national debt went from 26 trillion to over 30 trillion, and it's increasing by the second. And it's a rapid parabolic increase in deficit spending, and that's also trickling down into cash that people have in their hands. And why do they put it in centralized bank accounts? If you even had a suspicion that your funds were at risk and that they could be taken from you in bank insolvency, and there was an easy option for you to keep it safe, why wouldn't you do that? Well, the reason is people just don't know about it. Yeah. They just don't know about other options.
Well, we're getting low on time here, guys, and I want to get this wrapped up. But before we do, I know that this really is going to be tying into the next podcast. So, Seth, why don't you lead us out and tell us how this all wraps up today, and then how it's going to lead into the next podcast.
Sure. Well, we're going to get into the fact that there is a better option in place to store your cash in an asset-protected structure. I mean, some people put money under their mattress. Some people put it in the ground if they don't want to trust a bank. And those are probably better than a centralized bank, frankly, in this current culture, but there's a much better option. And so we're going to lay that out in the next episode and dig into what that option is and how to protect your cash assets. And we're also going to talk about how to protect your real estate and other business assets through private banking strategies.
All right, gentlemen, well, I appreciate your time today. Vance, any closing thoughts from you today?
I just want to try to keep as many people alert to the situations, that there are alternatives. You don't have to just accept what's coming down the pike. And we hope we can contribute to that knowledge. And I think that's, important for everybody to know.
All right. And then my last question is this, Seth, if people want to hear more or find out more, before they don't want to wait for that next podcast, I know they can go to the website. What's the address for people to get there?
It's privatebankingstrategies.com, privatebankingstrategies.com. And on the website, you can give us your email, and in exchange for that, you can download a copy of our red pill book, we like to call it, what banks don't want you to know and how you can protect yourself. That's a free book, and you can also listen to it in audio form. We've also got a resources page where we've got podcasts that we've produced on a number of different topics that drill down on the 7 pillars of private banking strategies. And there's blog posts, and the emails that we have are quite robust in describing various scenarios and circumstances where people can sink their teeth into private banking strategies as well, Eric.
All right, perfect. Thank you guys so much for your time today. And of course, our last thank you goes to you, listening audience. We wouldn't be here without you. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Private Banking Strategies podcast with Vance Lowe and Seth Hicks. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Vance and Seth come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it really easy to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And again, I'm going to encourage you to do that just because this is a lot of information, a lot of education that these guys are providing. And there's nothing better than people that are kind of in that similar situation or have those same concerns, striking up a conversation about what you're learning on this podcast. So please share this. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Private Banking Strategies, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Did that story feel like it was about you? Do you feel you should be making more progress toward your financial goals? Do you feel stuck? Let us help you get unstuck. Are you ready to take action and get your own private bank? Please call Private Banking Strategies at 817-200-4777 or visit us at www.privatebankingstrategies.com.
Thank you for listening to the Private Banking Strategies Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Private Banking Strategies. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.